tonight. It seems like we're going to have a great turnout, which is really exciting because we're going to experience some very relevant and valuable insight that our speakers will be sharing tonight. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ruby Shah. I graduated from Rollins in May of 2019 with a focus in global health, and I currently work as a global health project coordinator at Columbia Medical Center. Joining me as my co-host this evening is fellow leader for the Rollins NYC Alumni Network, is Sithara Patel.
Hi, everybody. As Ruby said, my name is Sithara Patel. I graduated Rollins in May 2019 as well with a focus in health policy and management. I currently live in New York City and also work at New York Presbyterian's Columbia campus, where I do strategy and operation work for the ECMO team. But over the last year, my role has really shifted to help with the hospital's COVID efforts.
Great, thank you, Sithara. And if any one of you would like to connect with us, please feel free to email us or add us on LinkedIn, especially if you're in the New York City area, or if you're thinking about moving into the area. Our goal is to create a close-knit community of the Rollins alumni here. And so you can find our information in the chat box that Sithara will be sending in right now. And on that note, we can begin our program. First, I'd like to introduce our first two speakers leading the guided discussion on their career journeys, Niles Friedman and Adele Stewart. Niles Friedman graduated from RSPH with a health policy and management focus in 1999 and has over 15 years of experience in executive management and advisory jobs that span the private, public, and social impact sectors. Over the last 10 years, he's created innovation capacity, launched new offices and services, and instilled culture change across the US federal government, the state of California, Los Angeles County, and international ministries. He currently splits time between Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. Next, I'd like to introduce Adele Stewart. Adele is an associate at Double Lantern Informatics, where she works as an informaticist on both clinical and public health projects. She previously worked in business and community development in both health and education organizations before transitioning to informatics. Adele is currently a student of the Rollins Executive MPH program in the Applied Public Health Informatics track. In her free time, she serves as the chair of the Public and Political Affairs Committee of the Junior League of Atlanta Incorporated, and she co-leads the Georgia Stomp Advocacy Coalition, which she co-founded in 2018. Please join me in welcoming Niles and Adele.
Hi, so
hello,
happy
everyone.
to be here.
Yeah, it's really good to be here.
We are so excited to share some of our experiences with y'all and to hopefully spark a conversation that will instill some confidence and maybe lead to some new networking opportunities, and then to learn from Kim and the Q&A at the end of the call. And I'm extra grateful because this has given me the opportunity to connect with the other folks that are here. I'm just in admiration of the work that they do. And Niles, that really is you in particular, because we've gotten to connect over the last couple of days, and I've learned about your amazing career. Yeah, it's so great.
No, it's been really, I think it really speaks to the Rollins sort of community. I mean, it's like we both kind of went through the same program. You're in it, I was in it 2 decades ago, which is really wild to think about. But yeah, very common values, like common ways of thinking. So yeah, absolutely agree. It's been really great to get connected back into this crew. I also think I really appreciate, sorry, one point I was just going to make before we jump in. This poll is really helpful because Adele and I were talking about this last week. And it was, how do we, in 20 minutes, really instill some level of value and information? And just this one data point, it was 57% of folks on the call are in the public sector today. But then when you looked at where you wanted to go, it was like, basically the message was, I want to make a career shift. Like, I don't know exactly what that is, but there was a core group that wants to stay in the public sector, and then others want to go to private or some combination thereof. But there's a real sort of core tenet of like what I think we can share today around that, which is really great. So I appreciate you guys doing that. It's sort of like quantitative information to drive the discussion of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's clearly a Rollins grad, bringing it back to the data. No, I think that is such a great transition into one of the things that you and I talked about, which is kind of the relationship between confidence and possibility when you think about a career transition, and how Rollins really prepares you, but also ensures that you're connected to people who can get you where you want to go. And so I think that is such a fantastic value that I didn't necessarily anticipate when I entered the executive program in the fall, but that I'm seeing day in and day out as part of the program. And now that I know a fair number of Rollins graduates. So when we talked about confidence, I think if I can unpack that a bit, it was really about a frame of mind and a way to envision the world being your oyster in a way that's not super overwhelming. You know, when you're really qualified, the world actually is your oyster, and you've experienced that being both global and domestic in your career, and public and private. Like, you've just run the gamut of opportunities. And so knowing that you can step into any opportunity and be competent is such a grounding factor, I think, when evaluating possible opportunities. And one thing that I'd love to chat a little bit about is how preparedness really is such a key part of that confidence factor. But then also, like, knowing what parallels your skill sets have in other fields, and being able to really boil something down to its bare minerals, or its bare essentials. I don't know if you want to chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that I love that idea of like the confidence matched with the possibilities. And that's kind of a mindset, right? That's kind of, you know, I've got this bolus of information or skills, or I've worked in these different fields or industries or sectors, and that's actually an asset. That's actually a huge value add in general, but I think even more so now, given demand for cross-sector skills. And if you have worked in the public sector, the private sector is really hungry to find folks that can bring that institutional knowledge in, and vice versa. So this point is really spot on, Adele, in the sense of, one of the things I was going to pose to the group, that when I think about some of my shifts in careers from like the private to this hybrid startup world, then to more the traditional public health world, public sector world, is like, what are those core themes? Like, what are those core tenets? What's this kind of arc in your career that you can say, regardless of title, position, industry, sector, geography, these are things that I'm really good at. These are things that I really like to do, you know. And I was thinking about it just as an example for myself. Like, I love to create, I love to build, I love to work with teams, but it's kind of this startup mentality environment that's kind of ambiguous, and there's a lot of unknown, but I really thrive in that. And that's where I love to sort of find opportunities and in roles. So if you can do that for yourself, I think then the sector, the industry, the geography, those become the additional layers upon which to build like a new career or a shift in your career. But yeah, it's a really important point, because it also, that exercise, and I've done that twice when I've had bigger pivots, it's just helped me to get that confidence you talked about. It helped me to say, hey, I've worked in the private sector for 8 years. I want to do something in international development. I've never lived in Africa. I've never done health system strengthening work. I never had no experience in HIV and AIDS work. But the private sector foundation, when I sort of spoke about it, then these organizations were saying, wow, that's really interesting. I can see how we can apply you into an environment that's maybe a little unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can-do attitude, it sounds so cheesy, but it really is part and parcel to both like a day-to-day operations point of view, where if you're going into a meeting and you think, you know, this really doesn't have anything to do with what I do on a day-to-day basis. I actually don't need to know how. In my first job, I worked for a telecommunications company as a business manager. I thought, I'm going to learn how to handle workers' comp, and I'm going to learn how to balance the books, and I'm going to move on to my next position. But when presented with the opportunity to sit in with meetings with our our tower construction folks who were going out and building in these greenfield areas, I actually ended up learning about geographic information systems, and like that attitude of paying attention really ended up bearing fruit later on, just like you've said with your international work. And I'm sure you could come up with 1,000 other examples, but
Totally.
It's so key.
Well, and you're also talking about this dimension of, like you were saying at the beginning, like how do you distill, right? How do you break down? So if you've been in one industry for 10 years, and let's say it's been the private sector, but you want to move to the public or vice versa, like distill down what you've done, right? Distill down the skills, distill down like the projects, like what were the approaches that you brought to bear? Because that's actually where then you can really parlay that into a different sector, a different industry. When you have taken the time to say, hey, I've done new product development or business development, or whatever the skills are, whatever the sort of approaches are. And I think that makes you more not only marketable, but it sort of then brings some of the technical layers of work that you've done. That becomes a bit secondary. So you lead with the primary. Hey, I've done this amount of work across, let's say, this last 10 years, and I can see how it's applicable. And then when you get into, well, tell me more about the depth of work that you've done, well, then you can get into industry and, the different sort of technical aspects of how we actually do work day to day. But that takes a bit of time. Like you have to spend the time, right, to sort of sit back and distill it and say, based on what I've done and where I'd like to go, starting to create those matches for yourself. Yeah. I know you had a similar experience too when you were thinking about getting into consulting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was 100% everything that you just said. And I think it was 100% that other facet of what I think Rollins is so good at, which is connecting you with a network of really fantastic individuals. I would say not a single career step that I've made would have been possible without the relationships that I had in place. And so whether that was sending someone a cold email over or a cold LinkedIn request to just say, I'm really interested in what you do. Do you have 15 minutes? Like those cheesy coffee chats that you hear about are so effective. They facilitated a transition that my husband made into a new industry. They facilitated my latest transition to work for Double Lantern Informatics, where that 15-minute chat ended up being a 2-hour chat. And we just knew that it was the perfect fit. So I think that relationships can be so key in bringing your authentic self and stepping into a new opportunity, but also are so foundational at the place where you are, meaning like don't neglect the bridges that you're building at your current job in lieu of or in order to make a transition. Those relationships that you have at any point in time can be so key in making that next jump. You never know where it will come from. And I don't think that's a matter of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think that's a matter of ensure the people that you know your capabilities and know what you're looking for so that they can be the folks that help guide you on your next step.
I can't agree with this more. No, and I think this is because you're right. You hear a lot of more general, like build a network, right? Connect with as many people as possible. But I think what you're talking about, there's a nuance and depth there of also find a tribe that understands who you are, right? And if you don't necessarily know where you want to go, they get your intention. They get like where you'd like to go, and they can understand your background and your skills. And it's so funny you mentioned yourself and your husband, because one of my big transitions from the private sector to international development came from a lunch with someone that I knew from a consulting group who had this startup. And it was like, I went into it thinking, hey, it'd be great to connect with John. We haven't talked to him in a year. That turned into a 4-hour lunch. And he basically was like, hey, do you want to move to Cape Town, South Africa and do this work? And so, but he knew me, right? We were friends, and he kind of he got where I wanted to go. And he, to your point too, he also understood like what I had done, right? So it's kind of maybe the next level of like relationship building, and that can be a smaller sort of core group that can also help you with networking as you think about opportunities. And one of the things you mentioned last week too that I thought was really important was just this idea of like mentors. There are so many people out there right now that I think are going through transitions with jobs. We have this whole remote work environment, which sort of lends itself to I think new opportunities, like if you live in Atlanta and you really like a company that's based in Chicago, you could work there, right? Depending on if it all sort of fit in. So I think people I find are more receptive to it on both sides, of being a mentor and being a mentee, because we're kind of in this really strange space right now and have been for years. So it's kind of like all hands on deck. Let's try to figure out how we work and collaborate together. So the mentor piece is big. And then one of the other things we talked about was, if you're maybe unsure if you want to move into a new sector, a new industry, like I am finding contractual opportunities and volunteer opportunities, if you can do that, are a great way to sort of put your toe in the water and see, is this really something I want to do? I mean, the last, let's say 5 years for me, the majority of my work has been contract based. So a year, 2 years. It gives a different level of flexibility in the public sector and some of the work that I've done, but it also gave me an opportunity to see, like, do I want to stay, for example, with the state of California? Do I want to stay with Los Angeles County? In those cases, I love the work, but I wasn't sure I wanted to become a permanent employee in that environment. So
Yeah.
just another way to look at it. You don't have to go like make this big leap. Find a 3-month contract with an organization that you might want to work for, or there's all these volunteer opportunities that, again, if you have time and capacity, right, could be a great way to test it out.
Totally. I would say that personally, being a volunteer and kind of living and breathing that community capacity life has been critical for my entire career, honestly. So I wanted to make sure that in my bio that Ruby so nicely read off earlier, that it was included some of the work that I do outside of work and outside of my life at home, because the opportunities that I've had as a volunteer have been incredible in building up my skill sets, whether it's learning how to use things like MailChimp that I would never have learned how to use before, but I had to learn because of the volunteer opportunity that I was involved with, or if it was in starting this advocacy coalition. All of a sudden I've learned so much more about government infrastructure and how the government puts together a budget, and what are the systems that are in play that may or may not be relevant for my work in the private sector. Like, holy cannoli, the folks that you get access to when you're volunteering your time and the information that they're willing to share when you are able to offer value in return, I think it's just phenomenal. And so I can't emphasize enough how important that is. But I also love that, like, some folks don't have time for volunteer opportunities, and I totally get that. And so the idea of freelancing or doing contract work, I think, is a really valuable piece about finding another way to dip your toes in.
No, absolutely. And I think the environment is just more conducive because, candidly, a lot of companies are holding back from massive hiring. The public sector is unfortunately having big budget cuts. So freelance contractual work is more attractive for just purely fiscal reasons, but that can lend itself to a lot of opportunities for folks that are interested to make that shift or make a leap in their career without maybe going full throttle right out of the gate.
Yeah, I had no idea that, like, the phrase "put my resume on file" was that's a real thing. That, like, you really can ask them to have your resume on file, and then when they have an opportunity that meets your list of skills, that they can actually pull you up from the ranks and bring you in. And that was totally mind-blowing to me when I started working in consulting, that, oh my gosh, that's not just a turn of phrase.
Right, totally. Well, and the other thing too, just going back to this survey, for a quick second, I mean, I really do find that fascinating that, it's not surprising given our focus coming out of Rollins and where people traditionally go for their careers, but 60% are from the public sector. It's fascinating because, one, the shift that people then are asking for and interested in, it really lends itself, like, I think you're in a really good position, because when you think about for-profit, private sector, foundations, even nonprofits, your experience working in the public sector and understanding bureaucracy and understanding how to navigate that and the complexities and the scale and the impact that you can have in the public sector. I mean, foundations that I work with in Los Angeles right now are dying to find people that have worked in the public sector, because you can work with them to figure out how to better engage with local communities. Because if you've worked in the public sector, generally you might have that experience. So I think it's just a really great time for folks, especially on this call, that are thinking about those shifts, because you're in demand, right? And if you have a public health degree and or experience, it's even more in demand, right? You think about what's going on with COVID, and there's been some articles in the last 6 months that have been saying, this is really the golden time for public health, because we're going to potentially have another COVID. We're going to have other public health sort of challenges. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a clinician, but maybe you get involved in health system strengthening or consulting or analytics, or you bring your epi experience, to a private company. I mean, there's so many different ways to sort of slice and dice this. And I think the overarching message is it's a great time to do it.
Well, I know that we're coming up on the end of our time, but Niles, I'd love on that same vein for you to chat just a little bit about organizations like Fuse Corps that connected you to opportunities in that way, because you were positioned similarly and were able to transition, but you didn't have to do it all on your own. You could lean on folks who've done that before. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the organization, it's a nonprofit called Fuse Corps, and it's FUSECORPS. And again, it's a nonprofit based in San Francisco. And their premise is how to pair up mid-level execs into local and state levels of government, primarily cities and counties. But it's through this idea of like an executive fellowship. So it's a 1-year fellowship. You get training and tons of education and experience on how to build up those skills. But they put you into some really amazing topics. So it could be around redefining the transportation system for the city of LA. It could be around diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for a county in Florida. My Fuse Fellowship is what brought me actually into the state and local levels of government. And it was about building an office of innovation for the state of California. And so in 1 year, you get this amazing opportunity to dive in to these really senior levels of government and help to sort of craft strategy and policy, but also like really tactical aspects of like, how do we do this? And this is kind of part of that civic innovation, civic tech sort of movement that's happening. So actually for folks that are still in the public sector, that could be another way to look at your career. Maybe you stay in the sector, but there's a different pivot into a different space of how to think about reimagining service delivery for the public, which is really at the core of what Fuse Corps is doing. But it's a great point, because there are these, and again, we're happy to, I think, share this with the folks on the call. There's these organizations that might be a little atypical, you might not think about, that are out there. And this is a movement that's definitely continuing to grow.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right.
We'll pass it over to you, Ruby.
Great. Thank you for that incredibly interesting conversation. I'm so excited to discuss these topics more during the Q&A session. So as a reminder for anyone who has questions, please feel free to send them in the chat box or send them to Sitara Patel. Next, we have Kim Shope, who will be presenting on navigating changes from her very unique career coach perspective. Kim Shope is an executive coach and the founder of Shope on Purpose, LLC, a private coaching practice based in Portland, Oregon. Kim partners with people, teams, and organizations to develop leaders who are even more empowered. Who are even more empowered to achieve their goals. After graduating from RSPH in 2005, Kim was a healthcare advisor at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, for 12 years. For over a decade, she led projects and teams while advising Fortune 500 clients from the C-suite to the front lines. This is where Kim discovered her professional love of supporting those who want to grow, and her own career transition began. Please join me in welcoming Kim.
All right, thank you, Ruby. If y'all give me just a moment, I am going to share my screen. All right, are you able to see this?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, hey, it's wonderful to be here with you all tonight. As Ruby said, I'm Kim Shope. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I'm an executive coach, and I've had a really exciting career transition in my life several years ago, and I love spending time working with people who are focusing on making a career transition for themselves. And what I've noticed is, there's usually a handful of reasons people are interested in making a transition. Maybe they've reached the ceiling at their organization or on their career path now. It could be involuntary. The environment may have changed, a grant may be up, an organization may be shutting down. Someone might have decided to take a leap of faith and go out and use their skills in an entrepreneurial way. Someone might be really interested in starting a family and wanting to think about how they want to shift their lifestyle and their career to accommodate that. Or, similar to the situation we're in right now, maybe people are faced with a global pandemic and it really has them reevaluating, how they're spending their time, what their purpose is, and where they want to go in their career next. So regardless of the reason, career transitions can be a little scary because there is uncertainty there. And I love this quote by Mandy Hale. She says, "Trust the wait, embrace the uncertainty, enjoy the beauty of becoming." And my favorite part is, when nothing is certain, anything is possible. And so I really loved what I heard Niles and Adele talking about, because I heard a lot of that talk about embracing the uncertainty, because even though things may not be certain as you're making a transition, there is some excitement and some adventure there, and anything is possible. So a lot of times clients come to me as a coach and ask, or say, I've been doing something for the last 2 or 5, 10, 25 years, and I'm really good at it. But I'm interested in doing something different. I want to change careers. I have a different purpose and I want to put it into action. So where do I start? And those are great questions to ask. And so, I have a 3-step process, if I want to keep it brief, that really highlights where people go. And so the first step is really exploring and defining your values, your interests, and your needs, and being really clear about those things for yourself. And so, this is the self-reflection time. You see this woman here with the message in the mirror, who am I? And that is where I like to work with clients first, is really understanding, who are you and what is it that you're looking for? And so we dive into a variety of questions around, what are your values? What are those deeply held beliefs that really help guide your life decisions and choices? What values are you looking for in an organization or in your next career? What are you passionate about? What would you do if nobody was paying you? What would you gravitate towards? Similarly, what are your needs and what are your no-goes? So you have a lifestyle, maybe you have a family, you might have an income that you want to make. Similarly, you might also, not want to travel or not want to relocate, or those things are the things that are really driving you to make a career shift. So just being really familiar with oneself and understanding where one wants to go. Not so much as a tactical thing of here's where I want to go next, but being aware of who one is, and so that you can make a choice that is aligned with who you are. And then finally, what's your timeline? Being clear for yourself about what your timeline is to make a career shift. Is it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? It's a different answer for everyone, but being, clear about that for yourself up front is really helpful. And, I also realize in some situations, people don't have the luxury of time. So if you're aware of that, being clear with yourself about that too, so you know just how proactive you need to be. Along the way, there are different tools people can leverage to figure out their values or identify where they want to go or what their no-goes are. Tools that I recommend and that you can find online are, for example, this life scan wheel, which you can do a quick self-analysis by looking at 8 different aspects of your life and really identifying, what aspects you value the most and where you want to be and where you want to make some shifts. Similarly, there are values cards. This is one example of value cards, Planning on Purpose from the Hudson Institute in Santa Barbara, the Coaching Institute. And these cards are great because you can lay out like 50 or 100 different values cards and really take your time. And the cards take you through a process that helps you understand, who am I? What's important to me? And helps you narrow down to maybe 3 to 5 values that you really want to live by that can inform your decision moving forward. So this is that self-reflection data collection, if you will. Step number 2, and this typically happens when someone says, okay, I know who I am, I know what I want in my next career, but now what should I do? What should I evaluate? What should I be thinking about? Step 2 is that research. So really getting out there and figuring out what careers align with your values, your interests, and your needs. And there are tons of tools and resources out there that can really support you and guide you in doing that work. And so that's where I advise people to spend some time. So, obviously there's yourself, right? There's your own knowledge of who you are and your experiences. Similar to what we talked about in step 1, it's really doing that self-reflection, thinking about the jobs you've had in the past, the experiences you've had in the past, what you really enjoyed, what you'd like to leave behind in the future, and how that can translate into a new career path. Also, thinking about things like podcasts and social media. There's a lot of really great podcasts out there that help people think about where they might want to go next. One in particular is called The Talent Grow Show by Haleli Azule. She's somebody I know personally and have worked with, and she does a variety of interviews with different people. This one in particular that's depicted is with Dory Clark, and they talk about secrets of the side hustle and being an entrepreneur. So thinking about things like that, and obviously social media, LinkedIn, reconnecting and staying connected, just like we're doing tonight in the chat, with your fellow alumni, people you've worked with in the past, friends, family members, all those folks who can really help you think about putting your desires out there in the future, and also people who you can look to and say, all right, they seem really happy in what they're doing, or they seem really happy at that organization. I'd like to talk with them. So scheduling some informational interviews and having conversations with people to find out, hey, I have these interests. Similar to what Niles was saying, that nice long lunch where he shared his interests and his passions. And at the end, it was like, hey, do you want to move to South Africa? Right. And so really creating those opportunities to share who you are, to reconnect, and to find out what other people are doing, what they like about it, what they might not like about it, and how maybe they could be an advocate for you in the future. You can obviously engage support. We have one another, right, in our networks. We have coaches we can reach out to. We have things like career services at Rollins or at Emory. There's a variety of people out there that we could reach out to and ask, for help or support, and thinking about too, our spouses, our friends, those who are there to help us and who know who we are already and are willing to really just help us think about how we get to where we want to be next. And then finally, I know I heard Adele and Niles a few times talk about dipping the toes in the water. And that's one thing I really encourage people to think about, are what are those experiments that you can try, that don't necessarily require you to make this career transition in the moment to find out, if you're going to like this idea that you have. But like Adele was saying, considering ways to volunteer, like Niles was saying, some of those short-term contracts that are out there. If you have a topic or an area that you're passionate about, but maybe you don't have as much experience in, maybe it's taking a workshop or a class locally to figure out, is that something that's really going to be a passion for you going forward? So those are just a few things that you can do, resources, tools, activities to guide the work. And I would just also say, as you're doing this, think about and begin tracking some of those characteristics of this ideal job or this ideal career that you want to move to next. And keep track of what those things are. Maybe even go so far as to, draft up a job description of your ideal job that really, in your words, helps you understand what it is you're looking for and where you want to go next. So we've done some self-exploration and reflection. We've done some research. And now it's time. You know what you want to do next. How do I go for it? Well, step 3 is design your transition strategy with the end in mind. So what does that really mean? It means create an action plan that's going to help you realize your transition goals and be really thoughtful about it. What is your transition goal? And revisiting that timeline now that you've had some time to do that self-exploration. It's really easy to jump into step 3 without doing steps 1 and 2. And sometimes you have to kind of find a side hustle or a buffer role to hold you over until you can get into that career transition you really want to have. But being aware of that and recognizing that for yourself so that you can plan accordingly is really helpful. So having that clear end goal. Thinking about your strengths. You know, what skills do you have that are going to serve you well in this new role? And how do you market those? How can you talk about those things? As Adele was saying, how can you distill those things down so that you can share them with people who might not be in the public sector or the private sector or the place you were before, but can be universally recognized, understood, and appreciated by where you want to go next? Think about, you know, what might be some of your obstacles. So maybe there's some skills that you need to build or some relationships that you need to form. How can you do that? So making sure you're thinking about that and planning for that as you're, you know, planning with your end in mind. And similarly, who's out there that you already know that can support you along the way and advocate for you? So having that in mind as well, so that you can reach out to those people and really sing from the rooftop what it is you're interested in doing. I love this quick quote, and I'm going to read it really, really fast. A dream written down with a date becomes a goal. A goal broken down into steps becomes a plan. A plan backed by action becomes a reality. In one of my past lives, I was a project manager, and I have a project management professional certification. So I'm all about the plan and making it into something that is sustainable, realistic, and can actually be accomplished. So the last thing I want to talk about, and Adele and Niles covered this quite a bit too, is that idea of building those relationships and some strategic networking. So planning and thinking about your relationships with intent, the intent of making a career transition. And when I say strategic networking, I'm thinking about leveraging those relationships and talking to those people that you already know, who can put you in touch with people who are outside of your current network, but who are in touch with the places you want to be next. And so really coming up with a plan. The first step obviously is knowing what's your goal. I want to make a career transition to XYZ in the next, you know, however many months. Connecting, really being clear about what relationships do I have? Who can I reach out to? Who do I know? Who knows my talent? Who knows my skills? Who I have some good interaction with, and can really connect with. And get those names down and be clear about who they are and how you want to connect and how they can support you. And similarly, not just how they can support you, but give, and then ask too. And by that, I mean, you know, think about how they can support you, but think about how you can reciprocate. And maybe it's paying it forward before you ever ask for the support or the advocacy. So, you know, being clear about their actions and your actions. What type of support or help do I need? And what can I do for them in return so that this is a mutually beneficial relationship, you know, maybe even a friendship, not just, you know, somebody I know who I'm asking for a favor. So I think I'm about to my spot in the time. If you'd like to stay in touch, I would love to stay in touch with you. This is my contact information, and I believe folks will send it out after this as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to you, Ruby.
Great, thanks so much. We're now going to start the Q&A session. So Sithara, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kim. That was a lot of great information, and Niles and Adele. We all, I'm sure, like really got a lot out of all the discussions, and I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions for you. So we'll get started. One of our first questions to come through was, Niles, you mentioned distilling your skills. So there's a question, is there a specific checklist or inventory that you recommend for distilling these themes, perhaps broken down by technical or soft skills?
That is a really great question. I have some homemade resources that I created for myself. And I think one of the things we can do is there's definitely quite a few that I have tracked over the years that I'd be happy to share with the group. I think it's a great question because you can actually do it though both ways. You know, you could look at it through the lens of like, what do I have? What have I done? Distill that down to sort of those basic elements that Adele and I were talking about, and then go out and look for new opportunities. You could also do the flip. I really want to work at this firm. I really want to work in this environment. And then you can take maybe a job description, or maybe, you know, to Kim's point about engagement, you know, meet someone at the company and have a coffee conversation over Zoom. And then based on that feedback, go back to what you've done and distill it into, well, how do I fit? Like, is there a good match here? And, or maybe there's skills that they don't know about that I think would be really valuable for what their mission is or what their organization is trying to accomplish. So one, I'd be happy to sort of follow up with any sort of tools and resources, but I think that's kind of the premise. It could go both ways, and it's an exercise of, looking at your resume, looking at maybe projects, looking at experiences you've had, and saying like, what do I really like? What am I really proud of? What can I speak to that has a more generalist way of communicating impact across different sectors, industries, et cetera? I don't know, Adele, do you have any thoughts on this? Because I know you've done some similar work as well.
I just have an example, and Kim, I saw you nodding along, so if you want to steal some time, please do. I just have an example of a friend who worked at a Best Buy that I think is such a great example, and worked on the floor at Best Buy. And when he was applying for a job with one of the big four consulting firms, on his resume put that he had been the face of a Fortune 500 company full time or something like that. And so just finding those ways that aren't necessarily that are unexpected maybe, and kind of removing the subjectivity that you may have in your own lens and finding a way to spark conversation. Because if I were hiring somebody and saw they worked for Best Buy but was the face of the company, like that's definitely going to start a conversation in any sort of an interview. So I love that story. He ended up getting the job too, so it doesn't hurt.
Well, that is a great story.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Moving on to our next question. This one is from Evan. He says, I'm planning on relocating in the future. Do you have any tips on how to apply for jobs in the future? For example, he found a great opportunity in New York in August, but he's not planning to move until October.
So I would just start by saying, Kim, I saw you come off. Go ahead, Kim. You probably have great advice.
Oh, no. I was thinking two things. One, maybe going ahead and reaching out and building that relationship with that recruiter or whomever has made that posting, and share your resume, share your interests, and let them know a little more about your timeline, because everyone has their ideal timeline to fill a role, but that doesn't always mean it happens by then. And so staying in the loop with them and staying connected, I think would be, what I would advise someone to do. Adele, go ahead.
I would just say there's a whole nother element that Niles touched on in our conversation too, where if you love the position that you're in currently, like it's a different year, it's a different time. And if you want to stay with that position, but you're moving, be honest and say, hey, when you get to a date where you would feel comfortable if they said, we got to cut you loose because you're moving, be forthright and say, I'm moving, but I'd really love to stay connected. And I think I've proven that I can be productive being remote, as we've seen in so many industries. What do you think? And you never know what's going to happen. I mean, any company that you've been with for longer than 3 months has invested a lot in you as an employee, and they have a vested interest in not having to do that all over again and bringing somebody new. So leverage the position where you are.
I think one other quick point I would make on this, to just piggyback on what's been said, is there's also a way to look at it through, if you want to pursue those opportunities and there's a couple that you really like right now, I say go full in, like interview, like go through the process. To Adele's point, we're in the midst of COVID. Everyone's working remote. People have not been in an office for almost a year. If they're recruiting, I would imagine they're thinking about, even if you're not in New York, right? If you were in New York, you're still going to be working remote. So if you're in a different city for a period of time, you can pursue what you want, and then you can have a discussion and a negotiation to say, hey, well, for the next 3 to 4 months, I'm going to be based in this city, but my intention is to move when we come back online. Yeah.
Great, thank you, guys. Our next question is, how would you recommend connecting with contacts after years of not keeping in touch? For example, a professor you haven't seen since graduation.
I don't know. I tend to go with the honest approach. Like, hey, I know we haven't talked for 5 years. I'm really looking to get better connected in with our network. It just it's just a very honest way to sort of break the ice a bit. But I like this point that Kim brought up. I think it's a really important one when you network, is like, and again, you might have an individual that you want to connect with for whatever reason, but think about like why they would want to engage with you and what you can do through the lens of service or networking, or, you know what I mean? Because you can have that honest message. And oh, by the way, I remember you like this, or I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I see you work for this company. This article seemed really relevant. So you're starting off, yeah, with this idea of like giving back and making the connection before you're asking for, hey, do you have time to sit down? Which is pretty nebulous. You know, that's a very reasonable ask. But it again, just I think it shifts the dialogue and the momentum of the relationship.
Great, thank you, Niles. Our next question is from Chelsea. She says that every job, almost every assignment she's taken on in the past few years has been a stretch assignment, and metrics have shown that she's succeeded. Yet when she is considered for opportunities, especially internal opportunities, they still see her in the position to which she was hired into 6 years ago. So she's asking, how is it the best way to show her growth?
I'm happy to chat a little bit about the value of documentation. And then Kim, I see you nodding. I'd love to hear your thoughts here, but I cannot overemphasize how powerful it can be when you show someone what the description of your role is, and then what you've been able to do in that role with that amount of time while still operating on your current functionality. That's really hard to ignore. And it can be as simple as like creating an Excel sheet at the beginning of a year, or today, it doesn't have to be the beginning of a year, and just keeping a running list of everything that you've done over the next 6 months, or jumping in the time machine and doing that for the past 6 months or past couple of years. Facts are hard not to face. So.
And aligned with what Adele is saying, you know, I love numbers, right? So what data can you use so that's not just a qualitative, this is what I've done, but a quantitative, and this is how I've impacted lives, or this is how I've, you know, improved the business, or whatever the thing is, but really having those numbers there to quantify, you know, this has been my dollar impact.
Great, thank you guys. That's really good advice. Our next question is from Amanda. She says, when she was at Rollins, she heard that once you've worked on the research side, it's hard to move to the program side, or vice versa. Do you think that bias still exists in public health? And if so, then what advice do you have on how to make the transition to the other side?
I can jump in on this for just a really kind of relevant local example recently. So when I worked with Los Angeles County, one of the areas was to help establish, they call it, it's an analytics center of excellence. So it's an internal center that supports its 37 departments and how to think about using data and analytics in a more sort of atypical, innovative way to drive performance and decision making. And one of the things we looked at when we were building this team was folks either internal to the county or outside that did have research, data science background, sort of that analytical, obviously those skills. But this is where I think, you know, and Adele and I were talking about this, and Kim mentioned this distillation, right? So you're a researcher, that's great. But what are the skills, right? What are the skills that are transferable over to projects? And for me, the short answer is there's a ton of them. And your ability as a researcher to think with that sort of analytical hat on, whether it's quantitative or qualitative research, is such a value right now. And regardless of sector, it's again, just such a powerful way of thinking that a lot of folks haven't built up. So I don't know, it's a good question on the public health bias. I don't know, Adele, you might have some thoughts on this given you're at Rollins right now, but that might be a little bit more historical. I think things are shifting, and I think again, like that ability for you to just distill and communicate what you've done and the power of that is going to be a really value add for you.
Thank you. And just piggybacking off of that, our next question is, what advice is there for those moving from the public sector into either academia or think tank? What skills should someone develop or emphasize?
That's a great question. Moving from public sector to think tank, or what was the other?
Academia.
academia. I mean, Niles, you've moved from public sector into other fields. What do you have to add there?
Yeah, I mean, again, like it would be a question back to the person, but what kind of work have you done in the public sector? I think that's going to be core, right? Is it traditional public health? Is it project management? Is it, I don't know, leading a department? Or were you an analyst? Like that'll really drive, right, a lot of how you can parlay that. But I think if you're thinking about academia, if you are in the public sector and you have a lot of those skills, academia is looking for that, right? They want to know. I mean, longitudinal studies is just one example at the academic level of how they're thinking about different ways of doing research. So if you bring in that expertise from the public sector, and then you can work with an academic institution to figure out how to do those types of studies, that could be one sort of core area to think about, making those connections.
Yeah, I think now that I've had a little time to mull it over, I also think being able to function in a large institution is a real asset. Like having come from small business after small business after small business in my career, and now working for a small business that's actually contracted out with larger institutions, it's been really helpful to have someone on my team who can guide me through those relationships, because I'd never been in an institution where you don't just pick up the phone and call the owner of the company or the chief executive officer. And so having all of a sudden this red tape that you have to navigate and know how to be really thoughtful in your communications to where you don't overstep or maybe alienate anybody is a real skill and a real gift that you learn, I think, in any sort of research institution where you've got all these layers of folks above you.
Thank you, guys. We are approaching the end of our event, so this will be the last question for the night. This question is from Jordan, asking, how can I find career coaches in Atlanta who specialize in the field I want to transition to? I have 10 years of environmental research experience and want to move into sustainability, but have not had any luck finding coaches, headhunters, and the job market right now is difficult to navigate.
Oh, great question. The first place I would guide someone to look is at the International Coach Federation website. There they have a place where you can actually fill in some things that, demographics, requirements, what have you, that you're looking for, and then they'll help you find somebody and match you up with some people who could be potential options. The other thing I would say is there's places like the Hudson Institute of Coaching. There's different coaching programs all over America, and people are working to get their certification through those organizations. I would consider reaching out to an organization maybe in the Atlanta area and seeing, who they might put you in touch with, who's come through their program that they recommend. Obviously, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can help you do some looking as well, and I can put on my cap and see who I know in the Atlanta area from my program. But those would be the first couple of places I would suggest. Obviously, there's LinkedIn as well. I'm curious what you'd find if you put in Career Coach Atlanta.
Great, thank you, Kim. And if you could share the website maybe in the chat box that you mentioned, that would be really helpful.
Will do.
Okay, so that question will conclude our event. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining, and a very big thank you to our speakers, Adele, Niles, Kim. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today and share your experiences. It has been tremendously helpful, and we've had a lot of people on the call, so I'm sure you guys have helped a lot of people in this past hour. If anybody on the call has any more questions or wants to connect, feel free to reach out to us and the speakers. Our contact information will be shared again in the chat box and also via email with the recording that's sent out after the event. Additionally, if there's any alumni in New York City who want to be added to the Rollins NYC alumni group, please let us know. We'll get you added right away. And Laura and Andrew actually shared the link to that group in the chat box as well. I just want to say thank you all again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. I'm not sure, Laura, Ruby, if you want to add anything, or any of the speakers, feel free.
I just want to say thank you again. I learned so much myself from this event, and we're looking forward to having this again in person someday.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks.